This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. This week is episode 602, and we welcome Dr. Tony Ward of the University of Montana. He's the department chair and professor at the School of Public and Community Health Sciences. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. They are the reason IAQ Radio is still here and still free.
IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. Learn more at acgih.org. The Cleaning Industry Research Institute. Learn more at ciriscience.org. The Indoor Air Quality Association. Learn more at iaqa.org. AIHA, Healthier Workplaces, a Healthier World. Learn more at aiha.org. And the Restoration Industry Association. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are AEML Laboratories. Learn more at aemlinc.com. Particles Plus. Learn more at particlesplus.com. And Healthy Indoors Magazine. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com.
And our newest sponsors are the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. Learn more at iicrc.org and Healthy Buildings America 2021. Honolulu, Hawaii, August 10 through 12, 2021. Learn more at hbs2021-america.org.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Doug Conan, Aerotech Environmental, for identifying the 1953 novel Fahrenheit 451 as presenting a future society where books are outlawed and firemen burn any that are found. The IQ Radio Trivia question for today, Friday, October 16, 2020, has been sponsored by Ideas, a solution chemistry company providing unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Here is today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. What is the term used to describe fires spread by wind moving quickly across the tops of trees? Back to you, Joe.
Okay, so today we've got Tony Ward. He's a professor and chair of the School of Public and Community Health at the University of Montana. In addition to teaching environmental health classes, his research involves working with schools and rural communities and schools throughout Montana, Idaho, Alaska, and Arizona on air pollution from forest fires and wood stoves and respiratory cardiovascular health issues. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Great to have you, sir. Hey, let's talk, if you would, a little bit about the fires. We've been wanting to focus on the fire issues going on out on the West Coast, and I heard that you were a great guy to talk to about fire-related research and indoor air quality. How did you end up, first of all, so involved with fire-related issues in your career?
So I'm originally from Houston, Texas, and I moved up to Missoula, Montana in May of 1997 to go to graduate school. And at the time, I was doing a sampling program, air sampling program throughout Missoula, and with the intent of measuring outdoor levels of wintertime particulate matter and looking at the chemistry and then figuring out what impact that wood stoves had on outdoor air quality. So I had this large sampling program set up during 1999 and 2000. And then all of a sudden in summer of 2000, we had this massive wildfire that occurred just south of Missoula. And it significantly impacted our outdoor air quality for, several weeks. And so that kind of going through that and seeing, measuring what levels of particulate matter and smoke that people are being exposed to outdoors. And then later in my career, looking at the indoor exposures, that's what really started me down this road of trying to figure out like what people are being exposed to during forest fire events. And more importantly, what they're being exposed to indoors, and then what we can make recommendations to the public to protect their health, during these events.
Okay, and is it accurate to say that there are more wildfires today than there have been over the last 50 or 100 years? I mean, is that true in Montana as well as what we hear may be true in California and Oregon and so forth?
Yeah, we are here in the Northern Rockies. We're definitely seeing an increase in fire activity during the summer months. Our fire season is just compared to 20 years ago. It's starting earlier, it's lasting longer, and the fires are more intense, and they grow into these mega fires. There's a new term for these fires called mega fires. So we are definitely seeing an increase in these fires almost every single summer now here in the Northern Rockies. And of course you hear, the tragic fires that are happening in California and even Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So it seems like every year, these massive fires are breaking out, and they just seem to be burning more acreage and impacting cities, and not only that immediate impact, but you get the smoke that's generated from these fires that can travel hundreds and thousands of kilometers. And that's kind of an underappreciated exposure that's happening during these fire events. And, as a result, there's a lot of people that are going to the emergency room with breathing problems and things like that. So, there's definitely side effects that are secondary effects that happen from these forest fire events.
Well, I believe you're in the School of Public Health up there, or Public and Community Health Services. So how much of an increase do you see? I mean, I don't know if this is something we didn't really talk about before the show, but how much of an increase do you see during forest fire season in people going in for, asthma attacks and other things that may be related to the higher level of particulate?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, we always hear from our local health emergency rooms and hospitals that they do see that increase, and people visiting, emergency rooms. There's, several studies that have been conducted that do show that association with more people going to the doctor and to the hospitals during these events. But I will say that there's a lot more research that needs to happen on really keying in on that looking at the health effects of wildfire smoke exposure, especially, being exposed over long periods of time and away from the fire, downwind exposures.
Well, you've studied a good deal, and I'm not sure how much you've looked at the health effects of this particular hazard, but the wood stove issue, how is that similar to and different from a forest fire? I mean, what's different about maybe the pollutants that come from a forest fire than from a wood stove? And then if you could tell people a little bit about what your research on wood stoves shows with respect to health issues. I use a wood stove. I have for years. I don't use it very often anymore, but I suspect I've probably had some adverse health issues as a result, but I don't know for sure. What has your research shown?
Maybe I'll back up a little bit. And so earlier in my career, I was more heavily involved in forest fire research. And so one of the things that became pretty apparent early on is that it's really hard to design a study around a forest fire happening. So
okay.
And for example, we were working with a fire crew here outside of Missoula about 10 years ago. And, we hung some personal monitors, PM 2.5 samplers on the fire crew. And, we had it all planned out. We had collected some other samples from the group. And then they were going to do a control burn. And at the last second, after months and months of planning it, they decided to cancel the burn because there was a thunderstorm that was coming. So they wanted to get off the mountain, and so that's a really good example of like trying to design studies focused on forest fire smoke. It's just hard to predict in design studies to depend on a forest fire smoke from happening. So as a result, you kind of stumbled into this idea of measuring, the impacts of residential wood stove smoke on ambient environments or outdoor air. And that was here in Western Montana and the Northern Rockies and anywhere it's cold and there's trees and there's a valley location, during the winter months, residential wood stoves can be the #1 source of PM 2.5 outdoors. So we had done tons of studies with local health departments and, state of Montana Department of Environmental Quality, Idaho DEQ, and others. And identified that residential wood stoves were the #1 source of PM 2.5 during the winter months. So then we kind of got into looking at indoor levels of wood smoke from these wood stoves. And what we saw early on is that, there's actually exposures that are happening to PM 2.5 and wood smoke that are greater or higher, oftentimes in the majority of these homes than they are outdoors, when you compare it to the Environmental Protection Agency National Ambient Air Quality Standard, daily standard. So then, we started looking at ways of reducing levels of wood smoke PM 2.5 within these wood burning homes, and then, assessing the impacts of, did these interventions, did they reduce or improve air quality, and did they also improve the health of the residents that live there? So when you kind of compare the two, outdoors, residential wood stoves, especially in these northern climates like, Montana, where I live, it is the #1 source of PM 2.5 every single day during the winter after, all winter long, winter after winter after winter. Whereas forest fire smoke, 20 years ago, we would get smoke for, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and, a little bit higher concentrations than what we would see during the winter, but it wasn't continuous. Now, forest fire smoke is kind of a big issue during, a month, several weeks to a month and a half each summer here in Montana. And so that's a significant concern. But the majority of our research now is focused on indoor air quality and the impacts of residential wood smoke indoors on the health of residents in our area.
How does the particulate from a forest fire versus the particulate from a wood stove differ, if it does differ?
Yeah, it differs, and it depends on, how far from the source that the smoke is that you're being exposed to. I think we were talking before the show that this year in Montana, we didn't have a terrible forest fire season, although all the conditions were ripe for a bad fire season. It's really hot and dry, but we still had smoke, and it was coming from Oregon and in California. And even here in Montana, there was like a week and a half period where we were, just here in Missoula, it was unhealthy air quality for that entire period of time. Now that's not even our smoke. That's coming from, several hundred miles away. But the smoke that we breathe here is different than what was the folks in Portland and in California are breathing that are just right there next to the fire. So the smoke here is more aged and it just has some different chemistry. Same thing with residential wood stove smoke. That smoke that you're breathing inside the home is a little bit different in chemistry than the smoke that maybe you would breathe outdoors that has aged a little bit of time in the ambient air.
I can also imagine that if you were close to a forest fire that also ended up engulfing a community where you had built homes and gas stations and marketplaces and, you know, medical offices. Has there been much research to determine how different that smoke is compared to the standard forest fire smoke from burning trees and leaves and brush?
You know, that's a great question. And I think there's starting to be more research from some universities looking very specifically at that. And I think it came out from the campfire recently in California, where, you know, it's forest fires that's just burning in the forest. That smoke is different than forest fires that burn through the forest and then also start burning homes. And then you're burning plastics and you're burning, you know, rubber and, you know, all sorts of, you're releasing all sorts of nasty things into the air. So I think there's some research groups now that are starting to look at that change of exposure in different types of smoke, looking very specifically at that question.
Interesting. Cliff, let me make sure I give you a chance to jump in here. This is, you know, fire's kind of your baby, so.
Sure. Question for you, Tony. You know, there's been, you know, all this great debate, you know, I think on television regarding the use of masks for COVID. I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts or recommendations, you know, whether people should wear a mask outside to protect themselves, you know, in areas where there's, you know, significant outdoor smoke.
Yeah, there's, you know, what we see oftentimes during fire season is people just wearing bandanas and you know, cloth masks, and that's, you know, the smoke particles, they're tiny. They're, you know, PM 2.5 or 2.5 microns and smaller, so they're just very, very tiny. The cloth masks may do a good job of scrubbing out like chunks of ash or, you know, larger particles, but most of those particles can just go right through the cloth mask and the bandanas. So, you know, wearing like an N95 or mask, that has more protection. And, you know, there's specific masks that are sold that, you know, that are focused on scrubbing out smaller particles like what you would be exposed to during forest fire season.
Thank you.
I mean, but right now, you can't get an N95 very easily. Does your group or any of the public health groups out there give people alternative ways of trying to protect themselves? I mean, do they say, hey, it may not work that well, but, you know, try this?
Yeah, and that's what, you know, personally I've seen really improve over the last 5-10 years is the messaging that you provide to the public. Because I think a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that during a forest fire event that oftentimes PM 2.5 smoke levels are just as high inside as they are directly outside. And depending on the, you know, the tightness of the home and some other factors. And, you know, especially if you're a sensitive population, and what I mean by that is if you're older, elderly, if you have compromised health like heart disease or asthma or respiratory disease, COPD, or if you have an infant in the home, kids. If you have those three groups, then, you know, there's extra things that you need to be aware of that protect your health. And simply that message of staying indoors, that's just not good enough anymore. You need the messaging that is starting to come out now. And folks here at the Missoula City County Health Department are really doing a great job with revising that message, especially over the past several years, is, you know, using an air filtration unit in the home to clean up the air, creating a clean space within your home. You know, just making sure that your vents are closed so you're not bringing in outdoor air if you run an air conditioner. And another big challenge in our region, the Northern Rockies, is, you know, a lot of people don't have air conditioner. So during that time, you know, you're kind of facing that you're sweltering because it's hot there, you know, typically when we're having forest fire seasons. So you kind of face that battle. Do you, you know, swelter in your house and keep your house closed up, or do you crack the windows to let some cool air in and let the smoke in? So, you know, it's a very complex question, but that's where we've seen the biggest improvements, I think, is not just recommending stay inside, or if you go outside, wear a mask. But there's a lot of other tips that you can do to protect yourselves within your homes and protect your families within your homes or within your workspace.
You brought up a really interesting. I hadn't thought about the fact that this happens during air conditioning season, and typically during air conditioning season, when you don't have air conditioning, like most of the people around me here, we live up on a mountain and typically don't need much air conditioning. You're kind of in a catch-22. You want to bring that outdoor air in and move it pretty quickly, but if it's full of particulate you don't want in your home, what do? We had Linda Wigington on the show maybe a couple times now. She's with a group called Reducing Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces. They're called Rockies. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not, but she's got a really interesting group of people she works with. And they have been promoting using a box fan, essentially, a typical fan you would buy anywhere in Lowe's or Walmart or whatever. And then they tape a MERV 13 filter to that box fan on the inlet side, and then they use that to control outdoor particulate in indoor environments. But I never got a chance to talk to her about doing that in a fire area. Would it help or not? Because I can see that, you'd be filtering the air, but you'd also be bringing it in more quickly. Any thoughts on that?
As long as there's some type of filtration device that scrubs out those particles, whether it's a do-it-yourself box fan unit or a standalone filtration unit that you buy at Walmart or Lowe's or something like that. The key is to be able to, one, not bring in those particles from outside, but two, any particles that are already inside, a mechanism to scrub them out through a filter. That's kind of what the goal is. So there's a lot of box fan setups that I've seen that work great and that are cheap to put together and effective. So I think they can work.
Yeah, recently I've been seeing people doing kind of a different take on just taping the box fan to the MERV filter to the box fan. John, if you can pull up a picture of one of those, maybe it's probably on the Roxys website, ROCIS. They've got the box fan with the filter attached to it. I've seen people now kind of building a cube out of MERV 13 filters and then pulling that across. And you just made me think, so if I was in a forest fire, I'm worried about, I'm overheating, plus I've got all this particulate, I may want to bring in outdoor air with that fan, filter that outdoor air, but then also have a room air cleaner because, you're not going to get it all. Maybe in combination that would work better. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that.
How, in your research, how efficient has using let's just talk about using a HEPA filtered air filtration device that you get from Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, in a small room, if it's properly sized for that room, what kind of particulate reduction have you seen in your research?
So that I mentioned that, we started doing a lot of indoor air quality studies, looking at making recommendations or implementing interventions and looking at the impacts of reductions in PM 2.5 and improvements in health in homes that have wood stoves. So using one of these filtration units like a 3M Filtrete or a Winx unit, standalone unit that's good for, an area the size of a fairly large living room. So what we see in these homes that we use the filtration units is a pretty consistent 60% reduction in PM 2.5 in all types of settings in different homes. And we've actually sampled in hundreds of homes that have had wood stoves and using these filtration units. So we see about a 60% improvement in air quality when you use these filtration units. We've also seen, that same kind of reduction during a forest fire event. So they work really well. Of course, there's drawbacks to using these types of units. It's kind of like having a fan in your home. So that white noise sometimes drives people crazy, and they don't use it like they should. But if you run it on high continuously, it can have significant improvements in air quality within your home, and when considering PM 2.5.
Tony, our listeners are pretty, many of them are pretty well versed in measuring particulate. I'm wondering if you could give us a few numbers, like, when you say the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, what is the standard for PM 2.5, and how high do you see that get in both homes that are in, wildfire type situations, but also homes using wood burners in the wintertime? I mean, how much higher than the NAAQS do you see these numbers go?
Yeah, so that daily standard, 24-hour standard is 35 micrograms per cubic meter. And on average, we in these hundreds of homes that we've wood burning wood stove homes that we have sampled in over the years throughout Montana, Idaho, Alaska, and down in Arizona, we consistently see average concentrations around 35 micrograms per cubic meter.
Okay.
So that's important when you consider that, there is no indoor air quality standard, but during the winter months, you're exposed to, by definition, hazardous or, air quality that exceeds that ambient standard all winter long. We have measured concentrations, in up to 70, 80, 90 micrograms per cubic meter over a period of time. And when you look at like a 24-hour trend, it's not that high over that period of time. What you see is like anytime somebody loads a wood stove, which is the act of throwing wood in, lighting it off, you get a big puff of smoke in your home. Or anytime you stoke your wood stove, you get just a big puff of smoke. So you get this giant spike, and then it kind of dissipates out over time. We also have seen like really drafty chimneys or venting systems that go from the wood stoves out the roof, and that could leak wood stove smoke inside the home consistently. Or you get that ambient infiltration to the indoor air. Let's say your neighbor is just really smoking out the neighborhood, and that smoke can sometimes be directed right to your home and get inside your home. So there's a variety of factors that contribute to the indoor levels. During forest fire events, we've measured concentrations over 100, 200, 300, 400 micrograms per cubic meter during periods of time. It's again, just because you're indoors doesn't mean that you're protected from that outdoor smoke.
Are you? I'm just curious. Do you know what kind of levels they've been measuring out in California and Oregon during this most recent large, group of wildfires?
I can only imagine what they're measuring. And I haven't seen the actual concentrations, but I keep up on the news stories probably like everybody else, and there's probably folks that are on this call or on the Zoom from California or Oregon, but it wouldn't shock me if there was thousands, over 1,000 micrograms per cubic meter.
Wow.
I don't know about indoors, but outdoors, just significant levels. I mean, I saw the article that Portland or California had the worst air quality in the entire world during the summer. These are definitely unsafe and unhealthy levels of smoke that people are exposed to for extended periods of time.
We've got to go to halftime in a moment, but I want to squeeze in one more question on this topic while we're at it. I didn't ask you this before the interview, but I'm just curious. I live in coal country here in Pennsylvania, and we get a lot of people that use these outdoor coal burning furnaces and wood burning furnaces as well to help cut down on their heating costs in the wintertime. Have you had any experience with measuring the amount of particulate that comes from those?
I haven't. There's not too many of those here in Montana, and I haven't dealt with it too much here in the lower 48. I did work a little bit on it, or saw some in action up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and the ones that I saw were pretty significant sources of PM.
Anecdotally, I felt really bad for people in Shanksville down over the road, America's town, who have to live next door to somebody with one of those coal burning outdoor stoves, I guess you would call it. You can smell it through the whole neighborhood, even, so I can't imagine what it's like to be next door. They are they really throw off a lot of smoke, and it's it's that coal burning smoke, very tough. But anyway, let's break here for halftime. We'll be back. We're talking about fires and indoor air quality with Dr. Tony Ward of the University of Montana.
IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus Engineers and Manufacturers of feature-rich particle counters and air quality monitoring instrumentation. Learn more at particlesplus.com. Count on us. Healthy Indoors Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions available at healthyindoors.com. And AEML Laboratories, free FedEx shipping, great pricing, same-day results, and never a rush fee. Learn more at AEMLinc.com. Association sponsors are the Indoor Air Quality Association, a multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Learn more at IAQA.org. The American Industrial Hygiene Association, AIHA, Healthier Workplaces, a Healthier World. Learn more at AIHA.org. And RIA, the Restoration Industry Association, the granddaddy of the restoration industry. Network with leaders. Learn more at restorationindustry.org. SIRI, the Cleaning Industry Research Institute. See more deeply through science and research. Learn more at ciriscience.org. That's CIRI science.org. ACGIH, advancing the careers of professionals working in the environmental health, industrial hygiene, and safety communities. Interested in defining their science at acgih.org.
And let's not forget our newest sponsors, the IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. Learn more at iicrc.org. And finally, Healthy Buildings America 2021. That will be in Honolulu, Hawaii, August 10 through 12, 2021. Learn more at hbs2021-america.org. We're back with the second half of our interview. We've got Tony Ward. I'm wondering, Cliff, do you want to jump in here or do you want me to keep going?
Well, I just have a couple questions. Tony, what do you know about the chemicals used to fight these forest fires, the flame retardants or fire suppressants? And do these have any health or environmental hazards?
Cliff, I'm definitely not an expert on that.
Okay.
I know there's hopefully I know they've done studies to not put the most toxic things into the environment during these forest fire events, and so I know that there's definitely health and safety considerations on the fire retardants that they're putting down, but I'm just not I don't know enough about what's in the chemicals to really comment on that.
That's fair enough. The other question is somewhat global. We're having this breakout, or we've been having these increases in forest fires in the United States, as you said, going back over the past couple of decades. Is it like this in the rest of the world too? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's drying climates throughout the world, and associated, folks in Europe are likely experiencing the same things that we're experiencing here at these latitudes.
Thanks. Joe?
Let me ask you this. I know that maybe this isn't your area of expertise, but you know a lot about these fires and forest fires. I've been reading how today, with them burning as hot and as widely as they are, they're creating their own climate. Is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, I mean, these fires, once they reach a certain size and you know, they can start to create their own weather patterns and wind patterns, and you know, it kind of, the convection really starts to feed in itself, and once these big fires start and the conditions are right, you know, they can create their weather patterns that you know, cause them to burn, you know, make runs of miles at a time during a single day. You know, it's I've seen pictures of lightning within the smoke. So they definitely can create their own weather patterns.
Yeah, and then you got to think that smoke, it rises, and then it probably hits a part of the, you know, the atmosphere where it's much colder, and then you may see condensation occur up there. It seems like there's really no end to the changes that some of these fires can produce. I'm wondering if we could go back a step, because you're with the Department of Public Health there, and you see the health effects associated with inhaling this very fine particulate, PM 2.5, and smaller. What, besides the increase in the potential for asthma attacks and things of that nature, what else do you see as far as health effects related to, you know, people who burn wood burners, or they live next door to someone that does, or, you know, they're in a forest fire area? What other kind of health effects are possible from inhaling this very small particulate?
Yeah, you know, I've always heard that there's never been a safe level of particulate that you can be exposed to. So I don't buy the fact that one particulate can, you know, be bad for you, but you know, smoke has been with us since man has been around. You know, forest fires have always been a part of the landscape. But when you look at the health effects, there's been several studies that, you know, we all know the acute exposures that can happen. You know, watery eyes, irritated eyes, runny nose, congestion. You know, you feel it in your chest. But there's less data and research that's looked at the long-term health effects of smoke exposure, and that's kind of really what the big question is, because, you know, again, from these fires in California this summer, not only did it expose people in San Francisco and Portland and other areas, you know, large metropolitan areas, but, you know, like I said, here in Missoula, you know, 1,000 miles away, had unhealthy levels. So those fires that happen in California and Oregon are potentially exposing millions and millions of people downwind for you know, extended periods of time. So, you know, what we see with the long-term health effects, the suggestions are, you know, of course, it impacts you know, respiratory disease, asthma, but also cardiovascular disease. You know, that's kind of this emerging field of the study is suggestions that, you know, cardiovascular health endpoints are worse over time when you're exposed to forest fire smoke. And then kind of another underappreciated health effect is kind of the mental health, when, especially during a pandemic, when everybody's, you know, forced to stay home and you can't go outdoors or be around people, and then all of a sudden you are in this apocalyptic, you know, landscape where it's dark or it's red outside and there's ash falling on your vehicle, and so there's starting to be more studies that are coming out that show that being exposed during smoke events can cause, you know, an increase in anxiety and depression, and I can only imagine what it's like for folks during this period of time in a pandemic. you know, just that extra stress of having to deal with unhealthy air like that. So I think there's lots of adverse health effects that happen acutely and likely long-term, you know, being exposed over long periods of time. But, you know, that mental health aspect is just as important as the physical health impacts.
You mentioned mental health impact, and I've seen more and more research, not necessarily confirming, but suspicious, I guess, that long-term high levels of PM 2.5 could maybe lead to other brain-related issues like Alzheimer's and dementia and so on and so forth. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
You know, I've seen those same studies, and Alzheimer's is really interesting. It wouldn't surprise me that being exposed to PM 2.5 also has some cognitive issues or, you know, neurological adverse health impacts.
I'd like to do this, Tony. Cliff is, you know, one of the pioneers in cleaning up after and developing products and techniques for cleaning up after fires. And we've got a pretty robust group of restoration professionals that listen to the show and watch the show. And I'd like to maybe focus a little on some suggestions for, first of all, reducing the impact of the wildfire smoke getting into your home. And then secondly, maybe a little on cleaning it up. And I understand that may not be your area of expertise. So this is where we may do a little practice to research, and maybe Cliff can chime in on some thoughts on cleaning up. And then, you know, you could maybe comment on that. And then, you know, maybe it would be something you'd be interested in. Some of your colleagues may look into it a little more detail. But first, can you give us some tips on lessening the impact of wildfires and, you know, people burning wood burners next door on your own indoor environment?
I guess the number one recommendation I would make is to have some type of air filtration unit within your home, whether it's a standalone, you know, unit that you buy at a local store, or, you know, some type of filtration unit, you know, on your AC unit or heater, but some way of like I said, keeping the outdoor air out, and some mechanism of cleaning up the particles that are inside your home. And like I said, all the studies that we've done with these filtration units, they work really, really well in doing that. And again, closing vents, outdoor vents, if you're using AC or furnaces, you know, just keeping that outdoor PM out.
And I guess just if you have a central forced air type system, keep it running. If you've got good filtration, maybe you just keep it recirculating so that your indoor air at least is to some degree getting through that filter.
Right. And one other couple things focused on wood stoves is, you know, there are certain things that we could all do if we have wood stoves that will reduce the levels of particulate matter in the emissions. And probably the most important thing is don't burn wet wood. You know, burning dry and cured wood will definitely release less particulate matter into the indoor air, into the ambient air. And then burning at the correct temperatures. You know, don't burn at a temperature that's too low where you have more smoldering, because that produces more particulates. And burning at the correct temperature, you know, certainly does wonders in reducing PM. And then keeping the ash levels, you know, fairly low within the wood stove. You want a little bit of ash in there, but not too much ash where it's kind of impeding the combustion process. And then, you know, the use of fire starters, where you can, you know, bring it the fire up to temperature very quickly, and you're not constantly opening up the door and blowing on the wood or whatever to get it to go. So those 4 tips really do wonders. And for the moisture, having a moisture meter where you can quickly just, stick the moisture meter in the wood and check the moisture and make sure it's less than 20%. That probably by itself, along with a temperature gauge to make sure you're burning at the right temperature. Those two things are super important and easy things that we can all do if we have a wood stove in our homes to reduce levels of PM 2.5.
Those are great tips. How people with wood burners may not realize how much, I'll call it legacy dust and contamination they have in their homes, and that maybe some of our restoration professionals might consider marketing people that have wood burners for deep cleaning or something along those lines. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, like I mentioned, all the studies that we've done in measuring PM 2.5 in these wood burning homes, the average is 35 micrograms per cubic meter during a sampling period. So again, that's what's being released into these homes on a regular winter day of wood stove use, and then multiply that out over an entire winter, and then again winter after winter after winter. Oftentimes we go into these homes and you would see like this tarry material from the smoke that's on the walls, and I think a lot of people just don't have that. They understand that they're being exposed to wood smoke during a forest fire event because you could see it, and it's intuitive, but you can't really see it if it's inside of your home, and you don't really have that appreciation that you're being exposed to high levels of particulate matter. If it's just in your home and it's part of your daily life, if you can smell it, then you're definitely being exposed. But that could be a potential market for restoration folks, because there are high levels of wood smoke in these wood burning homes, likely way more over time than what you'd experience in a forest fire event.
Interesting. Hey, real quick, Tony, does the placement of your wood burner have a great deal of effect on the amount of PM 2.5 in your indoor environment? So in other words, if I've got it in the middle of my home versus an outside wall versus a west side wall or east side wall, do you have any recommendations along those lines?
Well, I guess the wood stove is always for the most part, where the people are. It doesn't do much good if it's in the garage, if you're spending most of your time in your house. So, I think it is more of a function of where it's, it's where it's located to produce heat to warm the folks that are in the home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like maybe that's something that we could, in the future might be interesting to see. I mean, it may be in the room, but would it be better in the middle of the room or against an outside wall? I know for heating purposes, it's better if it's in the middle of the room. If you put a fireplace on an outside wall, that wall is going to be, sucking for air, and that cold outdoor air is going to be a bit of an issue for you. So I just thought I was wondering if there was any information on that with respect to particulate. But let's jump over. Do you want to comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, I would definitely, that's probably a question that like a wood stove vendor, somebody with way more expertise on that than I have.
That's a good point. They'd be good people to talk to. Cliff, let me turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, when we were talking the other day, Tony, it seemed to me that you had some recommendations, I think, from, maybe it's a national standpoint on, if you had it in your power to change forestry policy to prevent forest fires, what would you do? What would you suggest people do differently? I mean, on a big, looking at this, from the 50,000 foot height overview, what do you think we could do to make it better?
Yeah, that's a really, it's a great question, Cliff. I guess there's two things that are occurring or that have occurred. which are kind of out of our control at this point. One is just the fire or the forest management practices over the past, many decades of once a forest fire starts, you put it out quickly, and that policy is led to a buildup of fuels, in our forest, and it is what it is. That concurrently, now we're starting to see, the impacts of climate change with drier summers, hotter temperatures, and that's resulting in drier forest. And of course, once you get that start in a dry forest with lots of fuels, these fires are taking off, and they're starting earlier, they're burning longer, and they're burning more intensely. If we stopped all the use of fossil fuels today, it would still take some time for the climate to adjust accordingly, and for for things to get more back to normal, whatever that is at this point. So I think policies that are targeting removal of fuels from the forest is certainly a viable option, especially if there's a way of increasing economics out of that and making money and generating jobs. Letting fires burn, especially in remote areas, that's the use of control burns is in prescribed burns I think is a really important tool, as long as it doesn't impact communities with smoke over extended periods of time, and then letting fires burn during the summer in remote areas, that's probably an option. But then you start getting into the other side of it, what the health effects, and when you start letting fires burn, and that produces more smoke, and then you're exposing more people downwind to smoke, and then what happens if they get sick or they have to go to the hospital, and then there's those expenses that you see on the back end. So it's a very, very complex problem and a complex question with economic considerations, with health considerations, climate change considerations. But if there's those tools that can focus on reducing fuels in our forest, and communication strategies to the public on how to deal with smoke, again, the filtration units and creating clean air spaces within their homes, use of N95 masks, those mitigation strategies that will allow you to maybe do more controlled and prescribed burns to reduce the fuels in the forest, all while creating jobs for the Forest Service, and taking wood out of the forest, and turning that into some type of profitable activities.
I'm wondering, you mentioned having like a safe room in the house. I'm wondering if your group or other groups are maybe working with some of the energy people, and also recommending that people seal up their houses better, so that you don't have smoke coming in through every crack and crevice during these types of events. It seems to me that would make the whole house more of a safe zone, especially if you added some filtration on the inside. And then the other thing that would seem to me that it would help is if you do end up in a situation where your home was in a very smoky area, and people like some of our listeners have to come in and determine how to clean that up and get rid of the odors and so on and so forth. The tighter your envelope is, the less likely that smoke would be in the cracks and crevices, in the wall cavities, in attics and crawl spaces and so on, which makes it much more difficult to clean. And I wonder if either one of you or both of you would comment on that. Tony, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the messages, at least during forest fire seasons, is just try to seal up your house as completely as possible, or at least sometimes these filtration units don't clean entire houses. They can clean a room. That's where making sure you have like a towel at the bottom of the door jamb or something like that, just to create that clean air space within your homes. And I'll let Cliff comment about the cleaning.
Well, I don't know, Joe. It would seem to me that positive pressurization of the house, if you could do it,
good option.
Would probably make a lot of sense. And, it would seem in some of the areas that are prone to wildfires, design the HVAC system so that it would positively pressurize the house. So essentially, it's going to be pushing things out rather than letting things in. I think the most, some things are really don't panic. If you have wildfire residue in your house, for the most part, it's a dry particulate residue that's very easily removable. And I would try to remove as much as I could in a dry state. So a lot of times you can use your vacuum cleaner. Hopefully you have one that has good filtration, such as HEPA, and and a lot of the brushes actually have, a lot of, vacuum tools have brushes, so you can gently, remove the residue. I think also know where to concentrate. In most situations, the residue is going to be on horizontal surfaces. So I think you're going to find more of it, on tabletops, on the tops of door jambs and moldings and so on and so forth, than you're actually going to find on walls. It's probably a good idea to know what's smoke and what's a pre-existing condition. So, if you've had wildfire residue on your home, you could go out and purchase, if you don't already have at home, these white cosmetic wipes that women use. It's like a white sponge. They're little triangles, and you can kind of wipe that on the outside of your house, an area that that you had this forest fire contamination, and then wipe them around the inside of the house. And what will happen is you're looking for the same color of residue, because a lot of times the smoke soot is going to be black in color rather than gray like dust is. A lot of times dust is going to be thick. It builds up over time, and these smoke related layers may be much thinner. So those are some things that they can think about, perhaps do in those situations.
Great tips. Thank you, Cliff. I'd also like to add that I like the idea of positive pressure, and the positive pressure is easier to achieve if you've got a good tight building envelope. So it's kind
Absolutely.
of like all these things work together. Tony, before we call it a day, we always like to give the last word to our guest. Any final thoughts, things that we missed? You want to add something to what Cliff just said?
Just thank you for having me. And it's always fun to talk about, our research projects and for us, it kind of goes beyond research. I'm a citizen of Missoula, Montana, that has to deal with forest fire smoke, just like millions of other people in our area. And it's, getting the word out on ways that people can protect themselves and just drawing awareness that, just staying indoors during forest fire events is not good enough. There's other things that you could do to further protect your health, and just getting that message out is really important. And I just appreciate the opportunity to share some of this with you.
You mentioned your research projects, and I hope you got an extra minute. You talked to us about a project you did for a restoration company, I think, in Mexico, where you were trying to determine how far the contaminant could spread, or something. Could you quickly tell listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was a project from the Las Conchas fire in New Mexico, and after 2011 fire season, and we were hired by a lawyer firm that was representing a restoration company to collect some wipe samples and 65 homes, give or take, and in areas downwind of the fire. And what we saw was About 70% of the homes did have measurable levels of char from the wipe samples. We didn't collect any ash from the samples, but we did measure char, up to 50 kilometers away from that fire. At the time, it was one of the largest fires in the area, but since then has been surpassed many times. But
how did you analyze the char?
We sent it off to a laboratory and did PLM analyses, if I recall correctly.
Okay. Well, Tony, thank you so much. Dr. Tony Ward, for joining us today on IAQ Radio Plus. This is Radio Joe Hughes again saying thanks to Dr. Ward, of course, to my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. I also want to thank our engineer, John. You got to have faith. Next week, we're bringing back Claudette Hanks-Reichel. She'll be talking to us from Louisiana State University down in Louisiana. We're going to follow up on some of the hurricane-related issues they've been dealing with down there that haven't gotten enough press. Please be back and join us next Friday for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reed saying thanks for listening.